Every night my entire town locks down for 12 minutes. I finally learned why. You know, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where the local diner serves coffee in mugs stamped with your name, and everyone will lend a hand to a neighbor in need, a place where generations of families grew up together. Well, that is the sort of place where I live. Sure, it is a bit rustic. Hell, I barely have reliable internet, but it is nice enough for us. It's the kind of place where time feels like it's standing still, except for one thing: the nights. The nights here are a little different. I've lived here all my life, and there's no place I'd rather be. Or at least, that's what I used to think. This place has its quirks like any small town, but there's a big one that stands out for us. You see, every night, without fail, at 11:38 p.m., the town locks down. I'm not talking about just closing up shops and less people being out and about. I'm talking about a real lockdown. Doors slam shut and are barred. Windows rattle and lock, and everyone knows they have to be inside and stay inside. At least for what happens next. The next part is strange. No one ever sees anything moving out there directly, but we all just know. We just know that somehow, something outside is trying to get in. An eerie silence falls over the streets. It's like the whole town is holding its breath. Then in 12 minutes exactly, it is just over. I've always wondered why it happens. At exactly 11:38 p.m., people here don't talk about it much, but when they do, they whisper. They say it's just the way things are, that it's been happening for as long as anyone can remember. But I know better. I've seen it. Whatever it is, the first time I noticed it, I was still pretty young. I think I was 10 or 11. I'd stayed up late reading some of my favorite comic books. My parents warned me, like many other kids in town, that we had to go to bed early. But if we did get up, then absolutely no leaving the house or leaving any windows or doors open. I was not asleep, but was still following the rules when I heard the strangest sound. It was a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I looked out the window, and that's when I saw it. The streets were empty, but there was a presence. It's hard to describe. It wasn't a person or an animal. It was something else, something that didn't feel like it belonged. It moved with this strange, jerky motion, like it wasn't entirely in control of its own body. It radiated a disturbing sense of distortion that made my head hurt, and my eyes had a difficult time focusing on it. I could feel this overwhelming sense of hunger that made my skin crawl. Before I knew it, it was over. It had passed my house, and I realized I had been staring out my window in a hypnotic daze. It was almost midnight, and I went to sleep and did not tell my parents about the disturbing thing I had seen. I didn't see it again for years, but the feeling never left. Every night at 11:38 on the dot, when the town shuts down, I know it is there. We all try to act like it's not, just behave like we have a strict curfew, and that nothing is really out there. Yet the people who are too bold or foolish and think that it's nothing, well, they don't last long. Those of us who are still here know that whatever that thing is, it's out there, stalking, hunting, looking for anything: an open window, a cracked door. Asterisk disappearances are frequent, especially for such a small town. The police have a whole song and dance for anyone who goes missing from the outside. But when it is a resident, well, it is more of a case where the families of the victims are reprimanded for not having known better. No one knows why the window of time is so mercifully brief. Almost just as suddenly as it starts, it's over. By 11:50 p.m., the streets are quiet again, and the town feels normal. But it's not normal. It never was. People here have learned to live with it. They lock their doors, shut their windows, and pretend it's not happening. I asked my parents why we don't just move, and they never gave me a good answer. All they said was, it wouldn't do any good. We have to endure. It has to be here. It is safer for everyone if it's here. It did not make sense. I know people can get attached to places, but it felt crazy to me. I couldn't just pretend this was normal. Not after what I saw. Not after what I felt. There was something out there, and it was worse than anyone would believe. It was just recently that I saw it again. It was a normal night, at least as normal as nights could be in my town. I was getting ready to go to bed when I noticed that my cat Quincy was missing. I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find him. Then I heard something and looked through the window to spot a familiar shape, and my heart sank. He was outside. He must have gotten out when I had come home earlier and was sauntering along the sidewalk, clueless to the impending danger. The time was 11:36 p.m. I had no idea if the creature did anything to animals, but I did not want to find out. I had never let Quincy outside before, and he did not come back to my shouted calls for his return. I had to do something dangerous and stupid to save him. I rushed outside, sprinting toward him and trying to grab him and bring him in before it was too late. I managed to reach him and pick him up, but then I froze when I sensed a presence as I was scrambling back to my door. Quincy's ears folded back and he hissed. I felt paralyzed, and then I thought I saw it again. It was different this time, larger and more overwhelming than before. Its presence seemed to fill the entire street, pressing against the houses like an unseen force. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. To my horror, it seemed to finally regard me. Quincy jumped out of my hands and ran back to my house. He had fortunately evaded whatever interest the thing might have had with him. The creature's head twisted unnaturally in my direction, its distorted features coalescing into more recognizable shapes. Staring into the grotesque visage forced a scream out of me. As I beheld the blasphemous impossibility, I turned and sprinted away, screaming like a maniac, my heart hammering against my ribcage with such force that each beat felt like it might crack my chest open. The sound of its pursuit echoed behind me, a wet slapping noise like a monstrous jellyfish gliding across the ground. Its deafening roar filled the air, shaking the ground beneath my feet as I ran for my life. I did not know if I could get away. No one I knew had been outside and survived. I ducked into an alley, my hands shaking as I pressed myself against the wall. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, and I could feel sweat dripping down my face. I didn't dare look around the corner. I didn't dare move. And then I heard the harrowing screams. They sliced through the air, piercing and full of terror. My heart raced as I strained to see who was making them, but all I could make out were shadowy figures caught in the open. The screams were short, sharp, and then they were swallowed by the night. The deafening silence that followed only added to the fear weighing down on me. I stayed pressed against the wall, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The darkness seemed to come alive with every creak and rustle, amplifying my fear. I held my breath until I heard the sound of the creature moving away. And then, just like that, it was gone. But the eerie stillness lingered, haunting me even after the clock struck 11:50 p.m. The streets were once again quiet, but my nerves were still on edge. I stumbled back to my house, every step feeling like a race against time. Quincy waited anxiously at the door and bolted inside with me. Seeking shelter inside, the horrible night had left me shaken, but grateful to be alive. Whatever that thing is, it does not belong in this world. It is not of this time or place, and its presence is so unsettling, it makes your mind ache just to catch a glimpse of it. No one can tell of its origins. Maybe they are lost in the depths of history. But whatever its history, it remains, always there, lurking in the shadows every night without fail. At that point, I did the one thing you probably think everyone should have done by now. I left my hometown. I moved to the largest city I could reach to get away from it all. My parents did not approve. In fact, they tried to tell me I could not go. I was so desperate to get out of there that I had to sneak away in the early morning when they could not interfere. I never understood why we all stayed there and tried to ignore the eldritch nightmare that hunted us at night. It seemed so simple, and I felt better at first. The city felt alive with the hum of traffic and the distant chatter of people during the day, a cacophony that made me feel safe, anonymous. Indeed, I thought I'd left the nightmare behind, that the creature was just a memory, a relic of a past I could bury. My new apartment is a cozy studio on the 5th floor, with a view of the bustling streets below. High enough we're looking out the window does not fill me with dread at night. Unfortunately, something happened last night that has shattered the fragile illusion of my peaceful transition. On the first night in my new place, I sat on the edge of my bed, flipping through a magazine to distract myself from the creeping unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The clock on the nightstand read 11:28 p.m. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the creature was gone, that I was safe now. But the weight of the past lingered, a shadow in the corner of my mind that I couldn't shake. By 11:38 p.m., the city outside my window was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of traffic and distant music had faded, replaced by an unsettling stillness. I tried to focus on the magazine, but my eyes kept drifting toward the window, the darkness beyond the glass pressing in on me. And then I heard it, a soft, tentative tap against the pane. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, the magazine slipping from my fingers and falling to the floor. The sound was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a chill coursing through my veins. I told myself it was nothing, I was just being paranoid. But then it came again, another tap, this time more insistent. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My eyes were fixed on the window, the darkness beyond it seeming to pulse with a life of its own. The tapping stopped, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then a faint scratching sound, like claws on glass. My heart sank. I knew that sound. I knew what it meant. Slowly, with my legs trembling beneath me, I rose from the bed and approached the window. My hand reached for the curtain, hesitated, and then, with a deep, shaky breath, I pulled it back. What I saw made me freeze in terror. The creature was perched on the fire escape outside my window, its twisted form silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its presence seemed to fill the room, pressing in on me with an unspeakable horror. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The creature's head tilted to the side, its gaze locked on mine, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. It was here. It had followed me. And then, as if in slow motion, its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and it let out a low, guttural growl. The sound shattered the paralysis that held me in place. I stumbled back, my voice finally breaking free in a raw, terrified scream. The creature's form seemed to blur and shift, its presence filling the room with an unspeakable darkness, and then everything went black. I regained consciousness, and I know it is not over. There's no escape from this thing that has followed me. I consider what my parents had said when I asked them why we never moved. Then, with dawning horror, I realized the truth of their words. It is safer for everyone if it's here. They did not mean it was safer for us. They meant it was safer for everyone else. They knew the danger. They stayed to keep it there. Now in my ignorance, I have made a huge mistake. Somehow, it knew I left. It has followed me here, to a place where over 1 million people will soon know about its existence, and maybe more if it moves beyond that. I am so sorry for bringing it here. I didn't know. Please, for your own safety, stay inside between 11:38 p.m. and 11:50 p.m. By now, it might not be safe wherever you are as well. I haven't slept since 2023 growing up. I had two choices in life. I could follow in my father's footsteps as a farm equipment maintenance worker. It was a decent job with decent pay, but I always got this sense of dread whenever I walked by his workshop. It was this big windowless building in a pale green color, and I always had this feeling that if I stayed there for too long, that place would eat me alive. So I went with the other choice in life. My mother, she was always larger than life, and she wanted me to be too. She was all about the hustle. When she and my father went separate ways, she took me and my sister across the country to Bangkok. She was the embodiment of Ot Prio Y Kin Wan, roughly translated to endure the sourness and enjoy the sweetness later. She would take any job, at any time, and claw her way upward. So my sister and I turned out the same. We would work, study, and socialize. We were supposed to be everything at once: smart, strong, cultural, and opinionated. I studied computer science at night and worked delivery during the day. I got a pretty good eye for traffic, so I can make it around the city without fearing for my life. That's easier said than done. Traffic laws around here seem to be more of a suggestion rather than law. I also did the odd job making websites for friends, family, and acquaintances. That would eat up most of my weekend nights. And finally, the one job that never paid me anything: looking out for my sister. My sister Isara worked as a club and event promoter in the inner city. She mostly worked weekends and nights, and I'm the only one she trusts to watch her back. If someone bothered her, I'd be on call. If she needed a sudden ride home, I'd be on call. I'd get yelled at for being late, or for not responding fast enough, or for 1,000 different reasons. It was by far the worst job I'd ever had, but family is family. I would be working so much that the only time my friends would see me was when I came around to pick up Asara. They started to call me, or lurk, something. You say when it's time to close for the night. I was the closing time guy. When I showed up, it was time to go home. Not the most fun nickname to be stuck with in your early 20s. When my mother passed from pancreatic cancer in 2020, I'd just turned 21. I was put in a position where I had to support both myself and my sister economically. Sure, she pulled part of her weight too, but she was looking ahead. She wanted to work in cosmetology, especially in movies and TV shows. That would take money and time. So for a while there, I had a lot of sudden weight put on my shoulders. Studies, work, more work, and being there for Asara. I barely slept, and when I did, I'd wake up at the slightest sound. I was so used to sleeping lightly, waiting for my sister to call for a pickup, but I didn't have a lot of choice. I had to keep going, for everyone's sake. So I made a plan. I just had to make it until I was done with my studies. I looked for temporary solutions. I'd take caffeine pills, but they ended up giving me a stomachache. I tried this dextrose drink from a local pharmacy, but that thing almost gave me arrhythmia. I didn't want to try any heavier stuff, so I kind of gave up hope. Then I met a guy named Somyot. Somyot is a nice guy in the wrong kind of business. About 10 years older than me, but 30 years older at heart. To this day, I'm not sure what he really does, apart from co-managing a couple of downtown clubs. I think he buys things from places you shouldn't, some kind of gray area importer. He was a part owner of a club where Asara worked on the weekend. The first time I met him, he was sitting outside the club with a cold beer, having a cigarette. He didn't look like the owner, so I sat down next to him to tie my shoes. He looked me up and down. "You just gonna sit down like that?" He asked. "You got an appointment?" "I need an appointment for a chair." "For my chair, yeah." "You the boss?" "I'm a boss, yeah." I was too tired to care, and frankly, getting my sister fired from that place would have made my life easier. So I looked right back at him. "You don't look like a boss to me." I didn't know if he was gonna hit me or hire me, but he ended up belly laughing and offering me a cigarette. So I guess I made the right choice. I would spend about 1 or 2 nights a week at Somyo's club. He'd offer me a job, but the pay was awful, and I was busy with other things. I literally didn't have enough hours of the day to work for him. I think that was for the best, though he was a great guy to hang out with, but he must have been an awful boss. Cheap bastard. Somyot had some sympathy for me though. I was working hard to make ends meet, and he respected the hustle. He offered me a couple of side gigs. For example, picking up leftover credit cards at ATMs. There's a kind of ATM that takes a long time for the card to come back out. So a lot of tourists think it ate them, so they leave the card behind. Somyot paid a little for each card I could bring him, so I would walk around and pick them up while waiting for Asara to finish work. Every little bit helps. We developed a good friendship. I would show up an hour or so before Asara needed a pickup just to hang out with Somyot. We'd usually just talk about movies, cars, girls, whatever came to mind. I didn't have a lot of people in my life I could just talk to about nothing, and I don't think he did either. We'd usually end up having a beer and chew betel nuts. They're these nuts that you wrap in a leaf and chew. It gives you a pick-me-up that makes your mouth burn. It sums up Somyot pretty well. Legal, but spicy. But things took a turn when I was invited to a private party of his. I'd been up for 27 hours straight at that point. I'd been working on a large project for my computer science class, and I'd been trying to get a couple of extra hours in at the delivery company. That, and a client needed me to redo their homepage after it got hacked. It was a perfect storm of a lot of little things, all at once, and it drove me to exhaustion. But I still got to Somyo's party. He had a nice place outside of town. He'd invited some people from the club and some business associates. He had these parties about once every 6 months or so. It was a way to show appreciation and brag a little. Still, Somyat had pulled out all the stops. He'd felt sorry for me, seeing me work so hard. And he'd brought a guy there from a research institute. They needed people for a data entry job, and he thought it'd be my kind of thing. Problem is, I was so tired I looked like I was on drugs. I didn't even understand the guy was offering me a paid position. As the party died down, Somyat took me aside and sat me down for a chat. We chewed some betel nuts, and he took off his sunglasses. The man didn't look me in the eyes a lot, so I knew something was up. I worry about you, he said. You're working too hard. I'm sorry, I said. It's not that I don't appreciate this, but I had so much to do. Then tell me, he continued. Tell me how I can help. You don't need to do anything, I said. I'm just glad to have a friend, you know. I could see the wheels turn in his head. His eyes welled up a little. He gave me a hug and took me out to the veranda overlooking the city. He patted me on the back. You deserve better, he said. I'll get you something better. The following weekend, I got a text from Somyat. He was excited to show me something. He usually had something to share, but this time seemed different. I was a bit anxious about seeing him, but it was a nice change of pace. So that Saturday, I was invited into the club. I went straight past the bouncer, through the dance floor, and into the back rooms. From there, I followed a corridor to a small office at the back of the building. After all I'd seen from Somyat, I expected something grander, but it was just a little office with an old laptop, a USB fan, a couple chairs, and a shitty TV in the corner, all accentuated by a couple of early 2000s posters of women in bikinis, posing with cars. Somyat was smiling ear to ear and waved me over. He opened a safe under his desk and pulled out a small box of white pill bottles. They were all sealed and unmarked, except for a small blue sunflower print on the cap. He sat me down and took a bottle out of his pocket to show me. This is gonna help, he said. Trust me, I don't do drugs, boss. I know you don't. This isn't that. He showed me his phone and a conversation he'd had with the guy from the party, the one from the research institute. Apparently, he'd managed to get his hands on a couple of cases of an off-market stimulant. I tried it myself, he said. Going on 2 weeks now. It's a little miracle. What does it do? What's the catch? No need to sleep anymore. He smiled. 1 pill, you're good for at least 18 hours. No way. You might need another hour, or to recover when you finally go to bed. But apart from that, it's perfect. Doesn't make your piss smell, doesn't fuck up your hair, nothing. No way, I repeated. Too good to be true. Somyat sat down at his desk across from me, giving me a long look. You won't let me get you a better job, he said. Let me get you this. As a friend. I could tell he was being genuine. You could say a lot about Somyat, but he'd always been honest with me. I swallowed my fears and picked up one of the pills. I don't know, I said. There's gotta be a catch. Never more than 1 a day, he said. Or you'll get sick, and no more than 2 days at a time. Maybe 3. But then you'll probably get a headache. Oh, and no drugs. What do you mean? There's a list of things drugs it reacts with, but you don't do that stuff. So you're good. What about caffeine? As long as you don't pour stuff like... Somyat picked up a small piece of paper and looked it over, reading from a list. Ericolini, cocaine hydrochloride, diacetylmorphine, or methamphetamine. You're good. There goes my Friday night. Funny, Somyat scoffed. If you don't want it, it's fine. But no, I'll try one. And so I did. Taking that first pill was like breathing in after a deep dive. I felt lighter, but not high. I was just well rested, ready to take on the day. But there was also a slight chill to it, like a cold breath sweeping across my nerves. I looked at Somyat like I was seeing him for the first time. He got up and slapped his hands together with a grin. I knew it, he said. I knew this'd be it. How much? I asked. For a bottle. How much? Take it. He smiled, pushing over the whole case. Guy owed me a favor. Really, you're just giving it away. I'm just glad to have a friend. That night was the first time I stuck around a party with Somyat, for real. The man was a force of nature. He'd down shots like they were water. He knew all the best food vendors on the block, by name. and he'd ping-pong from after party to after party without breaking a sweat. I was just along for the ride. We ended up drunk on a bench, watching the sun rise. Not a blink of tiredness in our eyes. Our day was just getting started. No need for betel nuts to keep us going. I wouldn't need those ever again. Next, you're getting a woman, he murmured. Then a job. A great job. You can fix anything, huh? That's why I'm the boss. I don't want to owe you anything, I said. You get that right? You don't owe me anything. Kind of feels like I do. He asked me to show him my phone. I did, and he scrolled down to his number on the contact list. He tapped it, hovering his finger over the delete button. You can delete me today and never call me again. And that's up to you. Really, really. He handed me the phone back and turned his attention to the sun. But for as long as you feel like it, I'm here, he continued. No strings. No strings. He shrugged and slid his final beer my way. It's just nice to be the good guy for once. The next night, lying in my bed, I was scared. I had no idea how my body would respond. It was a make or break moment where I'd find out if Somyat had screwed me over, or if he'd really helped me out. I had a whole case of those pills stashed, away in the closet, more than enough to keep me going for months. But I took his advice. Every 2 or 3 days or so, I'd give it a rest. So when I went to sleep that night, I didn't know what to expect. I had strange dreams. I dreamt I woke up in this barren world, with a dead tree towering in the distance. There were no stars in the sky. It was desolate, but peaceful, in a way. And I dreamt that there was someone there, in the dark, someone looking for me. But I woke up long before they found me. I was a bit worked up, but it was just a dream. Those fleeting images rolled out of my mind faster than it took for me to make breakfast. From that moment on, I decided to give these things a go. I would rest every 3 days or so, but until then, I was constantly on the go. I could work as many hours as I wanted. I could be up all night, finishing projects left and right. I never missed a call from Isara. I could keep up with demands, and I could do it comfortable, without side effects. Sure, whenever I crashed, I'd dream about that place again. The dead tree, reaching for the moon, the desolate ruins, and somewhere, out in the eternal night, something was looking for me, but it never had the time to find me. I'd always wake up long before it did. It was comfortable, efficient, and I could do it all. I had time to work a little with Somyat. Not anything big, just odd jobs here and there. He was fair, but didn't pay much. But then again, I was making more money than I knew how to spend. I got a second chance at an interview with Somyo's guy at the Research Institute, and that time around I nailed it. It was just a low-level data entry job, but I could do it remotely, and it paid almost twice as much as my delivery job. I had to brush up on my English, but that wasn't a big deal. Isara and I had to learn it early on in our lives. My mother made sure of it. Isara had saved up enough money for her cosmetology classes, so I got some more time to focus on other things. I invested some time in a startup app with some guys from my classes, and we made some solid progress. Overall, things looked pretty good. Weeks turned to months, and months eventually turned to an entire year. I still had plenty of pills left, and I got into a healthy routine. I slept better, I ate better, and I had so much more time on my hands. It got to the point where I couldn't imagine going back to life without those pills. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what that place in between the wakeful world and my dreams was. That place in the starless night, with the dead tree in the distance. Who were the dark shapes roaming the fields of black sand, and who was out there, looking at me? I wouldn't think about it too much. I chalked it up as a weird side effect, but not much else. It didn't affect my everyday life. So why should I care? Fast forward to 2023. I was co-owner of a small company. No more data entry. We had an office and 5 employees. My nickname still stuck around, but it was more or less sarcastic. I was no longer the guy who showed up at the end of it all. I was the first in line. I would plan my come-downs in a way that people never noticed. I had this reputation of working around the clock, and people just couldn't figure it out. I didn't share my secret with anyone. I figured there would be some serious consequences if those pills got in the wrong hands. My sister got a nice job at one of the local malls, one of the really big ones. Not just any old mall, it was very well paid, and she could support herself more than enough. She ended up moving in with a guy, and I got a place of my own. I could finally take a step up and get myself something nice. I still spent time with Somyat. He was the only other person in the world that knew of the pills. He'd stopped taking. Then though, he found them too distracting when it came to keeping a schedule. He was going steady with a lady named Wan Wan, and he hated seeing her go to bed on her own. It was surprisingly sweet, and more pills for me. So, in February of 2023, my sister got married. It was bad timing, since I had a huge project to work on at the time. So even with all my available time, it was still not enough. So I had to do something Somyat advised against. I had to keep going for 5 days straight, just 2 days more than the ordinary 3. But still, now I didn't immediately notice anything. It worked just fine. But when I finally crashed, after almost a full week without sleep, I had the most awful nightmare of my life. Not only was I back there, in that desolate space, I could feel it, the black sand creeping into my shoes, the howling of people in pain. I thought I heard gunfire, too. What little vegetation lived there was twisted into a midnight blue, just like the blue sunflower on the cap of the bottle. But this time, there wasn't just something in the dark, looking for me. No, it was hunting. I have this vivid memory of crawling through the sands of an old ruin, hearing something closing in. Despite the sand, it was wet, viscous. It made this disgusting sound, like a crowd of large men struggling for breath all at once. I would hear it touch its way across the ruins, looking for me. And everywhere it touched, something sizzled, like burning acid. It tried to speak. I know it did, but it couldn't. It had too many tongues, and they all tried to speak at once. Eventually, it found me. I couldn't look. I couldn't breathe. I could feel the size of it without even looking as it loomed over me. I tried making myself small, but it didn't matter. It sighed, like it had enjoyed a cold glass of water on a warm summer's day. It was so pleased to find me, and as it moved closer, I heard something dripping, sizzling into the sand. There was a powerful smell of ammonia, and something akin to mothballs. It touched my arm, and it burned into my skin. It burned so bad that I woke up. And when I did, I had a burn. A coin-sized black mark with gangrenous flesh tightening the skin of the arm, stinging with every flex of my triceps. That place was real. That thing had been real for a full week after that. I kept feeling like I'd been seconds from death. I had a doctor check out my arm, but he couldn't make sense of it. It was an acid burn, but it behaved like a frostbite. In the end, he had to make a small procedure to remove the necrotized skin, but it was overall fine. I just had to keep it clean and bandaged, and be prepared for a nasty scar. But that thing had been so vivid. Days later, I could still smell it. I remember this one time when I was taking a shower. When I had to turn off the water, I thought I heard something sizzling in the other room. Wrapped in a towel, I peeked through the door, hoping against hope that I was just being paranoid. That time, I was. But what about next time? I swore off the pills. I was in a good place, and I didn't need them anymore. I'd gained everything I wanted. Sure, it'd take some time to get back to a normal schedule, but I couldn't go back there. No wonder we weren't supposed to take more than 2 or 3 pills in a sequence. If I'd been there a second longer, it would have taken my whole arm. Another hour, and I'd be dead. I decided to give it all back to Somyot. By that time, he had expanded his business a bit, but he'd calmed down as a person. He was a changed man. He was engaged to Wan Wan, and he was trying to turn his life around. In fact, we hadn't seen each other for some time. He was a bit surprised when I called about meeting him in his office. That I met Somyat in his downtown office late one Friday night. It was a strange feeling. There were people everywhere, but I still felt like I was alone. There was this thought crawling around in the back of my head, whispering to me that if I slowed down and really listened, I could hear that sizzling acid as it burned into the asphalt. So I kept my head down and tried to get into the music, the bass, the beat of the party, but it was all just superficial. I couldn't help but think back on that thing every time I heard a cough, a sneeze. Someone clearing their throat. I thought that was it. It found me. I could feel the squelch of it in my ear, almost like a heat. But I made my way through the club and joined Somyot in his office. I put the pills on his desk and sat down across from him. I'm done with them, I said. They do something. To you? He asked. Yeah, I said. I'm done. All right, no worries. Somyot nodded. You okay? Not really. Despite not hanging out for a while, Somyot was his usual self. He put the pills away, sat down next to me, and handed me a beer. He'd installed a mini fridge next to his desk. The damn thing made more noise than his ceiling fan. I'm not gonna ask about it, he said. You look like shit. I feel like shit. What happened to your arm? Frostbite. Somyot snorted but saw that I wasn't laughing. He opened his mouth, but closed it again. Whatever had happened to me, he knew better than to laugh. Instead, he leaned over, looking worried. Fuck the pills, he said. You're sticking with me now, all right? All right. He made his best effort to keep me company that night. We had drinks, met some people, and sang some karaoke. I almost got into an arm wrestling competition with a drunk Dutch guy. It was nice, and for a moment, I didn't hear those awful noises. I didn't smell those smells. Later that night, I could feel myself growing tired. Usually, I would pop one of the pills, but I settled for a classic instead, betel nuts. Somyot and I wrapped them up and bit down. It was nice to feel that familiar crunch and burn. It was a return to form, in a way. It was the way things were supposed to be. By the end of the night, we ended up on that same bench, watching the sun, but this time, he was exhausted. He was nodding off over and over as he waited for a friend to pick him up. I was, strangely, not tired in the slightest. Maybe you still got some of it in your system, Somyot mumbled. Makes sense, right? Bigger doses take longer. Probably, I nodded. Or maybe it was the nuts. Nah, they don't work like that. They're a kick, not a trip. By the time Somyo's friend came around to pick him up, he could barely keep his eyes open. He lumbered into the passenger seat and looked back at me one final time. I'm getting rid of them, he said. Don't worry, it's done. You'll be fine. But I wasn't feeling fine. Or rather, I was. But that was the problem. I went home, and I still couldn't sleep. I went an entire day, and I still couldn't sleep. I hadn't taken any pills for some time, but I was still up and about. I was getting worried, but I didn't know where to turn. Had I taken a pill by accident? I reached out to Somyo's contact at the Research Institute, but we couldn't talk about it over email since it was monitored, and this was hardly legal. So we decided to meet downtown later in the week. For the next few days, I was a wreck. I kept thinking about that place and that thing. I'd been up for so many days that I didn't want to think about what would happen when I returned. It would be waiting for me. I could feel it, hear it. I met the man from the Research Institute in early morning. I paid for his coffee, but I didn't get any myself. He was an American in his 50s with a shaved head and a well-trimmed goatee. He hid behind a black baseball cap and wasn't much for small talk. I decided to get right to it. I explained the problem. After taking a larger than usual dose, I couldn't sleep anymore. He didn't look that surprised. That only happens when you take stimulants, he said. Didn't he warn you? I haven't taken anything, I said. I don't do drugs, you sure? He asked. Nothing. Does alcohol count? I asked. Betel nuts, caffeine, what? No, that. He stopped for a second. His eyes turned away as he thought about it. He brought out his phone and checked something, then nodded. Betel nuts, he repeated. That's high in ericolini. High in what? Ericolini. That's the first thing on the list. That's the worst one. Wait, what? He adjusted his glasses and read the list out loud. He was right. Ericolini was the first thing on the list, right there next to hard narcotics. What does it mean? I asked. What's gonna happen? He leaned back in his chair, sipped his coffee, and adjusted his glasses. We made this in our lab back in Vietnam. When the lab got shut down, it was scheduled to be burned, but we never got around to it. So you make drugs, is that it? It's not a drug, he explained. It isolates a particular chemical element. It was originally made to nurture a type of deep-sea fish to gestate a kind of rough metal powder. What? Fish? I don't. Look, it's not a stimulant. It's not a drug. It puts a part of you in another place. And while it's there, your body becomes disconnected from a few of your basic needs. In most cases, sleep. So what does it mean? What's gonna happen to me? He leaned forward, looking over the edge of his silver-rimmed glasses. Ericolini amplifies the effect by a magnitude of about 100. It's one of the reasons they had to shut down the development. At that magnitude, there's no telling what's gonna happen. Wait, 100. So you're gonna be awake for maybe a year, maybe 4. And then something I can't even imagine is going to happen to you. There was nothing else to say. He had no advice to give. There were no solutions. The damage was done. I almost burst into tears right then and there. My hands were shaking. I would be awake for years. And then, something he couldn't even imagine. If the effect of 2 pills too many caught me a burn on the arm, what the hell was going to happen after 100? 200, the bandage itched, and I could hear the sizzling from a nearby kitchen. But it wasn't from the kitchen, it was that thing, and it was waiting for me. It was just a matter of time. I tried everything, but there was nothing to be done. There was nothing wrong with me on paper. I was healthier than ever. In fact, the lab in Vietnam that the man spoke of had been shut down, and all traces of it was dismantled. I had a vague lead to an investor in the US, but it didn't lead me anywhere. I had to sell my share in the company. It stung, but the payout was more than generous. It would keep me afloat for a couple of months, maybe a year, while I tried to work something out. But it was a desperate search for nothing. Even the man from the research institute would drop off the grid. And when strange men in suits started asking my friends and family about me, I knew I'd taken a step too far. This was in February 2023. Every day from that point forward has been a nightmare. In May that same year, I lost the need to eat. It's like my body entered a kind of metastasis. I could sit in a room for days on end, staring at a wall, and nothing would change. I would feel nothing. I would experience nothing, and I wouldn't care. And with no food, I'd need no bathroom breaks. Sometime in July, I lost the need to breathe. I would forget to do it for days on end, and my lungs would deflate to the point where it hurt to use them. After a couple of weeks, I couldn't talk without bleeding anymore. In late October that year, I stopped blinking. I would forget to do it for long periods of time, and dust would settle in my eyes. It didn't hurt, but it was uncomfortable to wash them, so I just ended up keeping them closed. Something happened to my skin. I think it stopped needing sunlight. Over a couple of days, I grew so pale you could almost see through me. My fingernails would fall off. Without using my mouth and jaw, my teeth fell out of my skull. I barely noticed. I had to move in with my sister to care for me. She couldn't understand what was happening, and neither could anyone else. She would force me to go to the doctors, and they couldn't make sense of it. Whenever they mentioned specialists, some anonymous group would throw enough money at them to look the other way. But all of that was just cake topping. It was all just physical things. It didn't compare to my thoughts and feelings. I would feel closer and closer to that dark place, that space beyond, where that thing waited for me. It hungered for me. All the needs and wants I'd lost, it had gained. It was hungry, tired, sunburnt, and in constant pain. And it wanted to give it all back to me, to consume me with it. If I just listened hard enough, I could hear it panting like an eager dog, waiting for master to put food in his bowl, ready to tear into me, unashamed. Sometimes I forget what world I'm in. I'll get up and wander around, feeling the walls, imagining them as crumbling ruins. My sister once caught me wandering into the street. If my lungs had worked, she would have heard me begging that thing to leave me. Instead, I got hit by a car, and I didn't feel a thing, laying crumbled into a pile by the side of the road. The things people say feel like a distant dream. I have no need for serotonin, so joy is something of the past. Sometimes I can hear the music and cheering across the city, but it feels like they're mocking me. But the fear, that's still there. It may be the only emotion that remains. Now it's 2025. I think I attended Somyo's wedding, but I can't know for sure. I think I was there. I didn't see or hear. I can't feel anything when I move my arms anymore. There was a nice smell. I think he offered me some cake, I tried to smile at him, but I don't know if I did it. I've written this with great effort over several weeks. My sister has helped. She washes my eyes, and I would look at the letters for her to type. If I stretch a little, I can get enough air in my lungs to make a noise or a short word. Sometimes at night, when my sister is not here, I think I can hear something outside. Not just in my mind, but on the street. I think they are watching me. I think they're curious about what happens when I get to sleep. Or maybe they're scared. It's funny in a way. They called me Lurk. Closing time. It's fitting. I can't help but think I should have stayed with my father maintaining farm equipment. I wish I could dream of seeing those pale green walls again. I had to finish this in a hurry. I think the effect is wearing off. Like the man said it would. Yesterday, I yawned. Today, I'm tired. Good night, Bangkok. My sister went cave exploring. She returned with an awful request. I never understood her hobby. Why on earth would you want to let yourself be swallowed by the depths of the earth when you could? I don't know. Breathe fresh air, see the sky, be able to move, to walk. The Nutty Putty Cave incident was one of the many stories that had stuck with me, and I hated knowing she was somewhere out there, practically buried alive, exploring some godforsaken tunnel. I hated knowing that any time I saw her could be the last. I'd begged her to pick some other hobby that wasn't so risky. She refused. She'd always talked so passionately about the thrill of it. When you're down there, Jude, she'd start, and I didn't know whether to envy her courage or despise her carelessness. When you're down there, you move differently. You think differently. You're not you anymore, but someone more agile and quiet. Your skin glides smoothly through the rocks, through the guts of the mountains. It's something ancient and full of life. Time just stops and your heartbeat adjusts. To the water dripping from the walls, your eyes widen and embrace the darkness, and nothing compares to the first breath of fresh air once you're out. Every time she'd try to convince me, I'd cut her off. It's horrifying. You're essentially getting eaten by the mountains and hope they're kind enough to spit you out. All those tight spaces make my skin crawl. Imagine not being able to take a deep breath because some wall is pressing down on your back. I'd die. Last month, she wouldn't shut up about this new cave system she'd discovered somewhere in the north. A 5-hour drive, she said. I can't believe I never knew about this. It was so close to us. All this time, my stomach dropped at the thought of her going on one of those adventures again. You know, there are better ways to spend your time. Bullshit. She laughed. Look, I'm safe. I'm not stupid. I wouldn't do it if I had any doubts that I would not return. You should come with me sometime. I was quick to refuse her, and she just smirked and shook her head. Whenever she set her mind on something, nothing could stop her. She sent me some texts, updates like 2 hours left or the picture of the entrance of the cave. But then the updates stopped. I'd learned to let her do her thing and just wait until she contacted me. And over the years, I stopped feeling so anxious every time she would cut contact for a while. I knew she didn't have any signal down there. I knew to just wait. The last update she'd sent me was around 10 a.m. It was midnight now, and as I tried to fall asleep, something wouldn't let me. I kept seeing her when I closed my eyes, imagining her down there, swallowed by the rocks. I twisted and turned in my bed the same way she did, deep into the ground. My clothes were drenched in sweat, and I hoped she had just forgotten to update me, and that she was out of the cave. At one point, my phone buzzed. I shot up and glared. At the time, it was a little over 3 a.m. It was spectacular. I rubbed my eyes and felt the weight lift off my chest. Thank God. I typed some shallow response. Then finally went to sleep. She came home the next day. At first, I didn't recognize her. Her cheekbones were more prominent, and she hadn't washed herself. She was drenched in mud and smelled of rot. Her eyes were full of life, darting from one place to another, and her hands would not sit still. She didn't speak much. I didn't know what it was, but I assumed something had happened down there that scared her enough to change her mind. I felt relieved maybe she'd had enough near-death experiences to finally quit. I stayed in my room that day, mostly working. I heard her walk around the house multiple times, looking through drawers and cabinets. Slamming doors. At some point, she stopped, and the hallway went silent. I was sitting at my desk, writing on my laptop. I could see the cracked door of my bedroom leading to the dark hallway and a fraction of one of our tall, white lamps. I was focused on the screen, so everything else was blurry behind it. Just some shapes and colors mixing together. It's not like I paid much attention to the background. Somewhere around AM, I called it a night. I glanced up at the hallway, and something caught my attention. The white, blurry shape of the lamp wasn't there anymore. Did she move it? I opened the door wider and peered into the hallway. The lamp was in its usual place, which had never been visible from my desk. My eyes stung a bit from the monitor, and I knew my vision was tired, but I could have sworn I'd seen something white, and still through the cracked door. I even assumed it was the lamp because it had stood there for hours. Although, if I think about it, the lamp wasn't that tall. I don't even know what to think of that, but I have this knot in my throat as I'm typing this. It's so strange that most of the time, the human mind doesn't register peculiar things as peculiar and brushes them off as ordinary stuff. How many times had I seen something in the corner of my vision and just assumed it was some object, like a plant or a coat, when it wasn't? It made me realize how stupid we are as human beings. If someone wants to watch us, they can do it for as long as they please, and we won't know unless they want to. I turned my head to my sister's room. The door was shut. I wondered if she was sleeping. Carefully, I tiptoed to her door and gently twisted the doorknob. I whispered. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed in the dark, doing nothing. Were you watching me? Watching you? Yeah, I thought I saw. She just stared at me. Then her gaze slipped to a fixed point behind me. She followed something with her eyes. I almost snapped my neck turning to see what she was looking at. Nothing was there. Double quotes. Are you okay? How was the cave system? Did you have fun? It's different down there. Yeah, I know. It's dark and damp and tight. No. Her voice was hoarse. She was studying her hands, turning them over again and again. Look, I don't like what you're doing. This is just ridiculous. And I don't understand if you just want me to freak out. And this is one of those pranks. If you don't tell me what you saw, I'll just assume you're lying for attention. It's really tiring to be your sister sometimes. She widened her eyes, still fixated on her hands. I thought she was deliberately ignoring me for a while, until she started coughing. Her cough became clearer and more controlled, until I realized at some point she'd transitioned into a laugh that sounded painful. She grinned at me, but her eyes were blank. Then, she mumbled something that sent chills down my spine. She'd spit out the words so fast that, for a good minute, I didn't realize what she'd said. We were both silent, just looking at each other. I didn't know how to respond, and was beginning to wonder if it was worth continuing the conversation. You're tired. Go get some rest, I began, but I got interrupted. You need to come with me, Jude. Where? You need to come with me and crawl under the earth. My chest tightened, and the corners of my vision went blurry. Stop, She just stared at me. Then, her eyes shifted away, out the window at the end of the hallway. I frowned, but before I could turn around to look outside, she quickly stood up and blocked my view. She sprinted to the end and pulled the curtains. Why did you do that? It's okay. Good night. She went into her bedroom, then shut the door behind her. I pulled back the curtains and stared into the darkness, looking for whatever the fuck she'd seen. The street was empty, apart from a car and a black trash can, some bushes, my neighbor's house, a bike, the streetlights. I pulled the curtains, backed out as I stepped into my room. A thought lingered in the back of my mind. It all happened in a few seconds, but it was enough to weird me the fuck out. We only take the trash cans out on Tuesdays when the garbage truck picks them up. It's Friday. I pulled back the curtains again, and the black trash can wasn't there anymore. Only, I wasn't even sure that's what it had been. When you see something off, your mind automatically ties it to something rational, some explanation. If I think more about it, it could have been someone crouched over. I shook my head. Stop, you're disturbed. Go to sleep. As I typed this out in bed, I just couldn't help thinking about what had said to me. The two sentences were on a loop in my mind, and they affected me because they weren't coming from a crazy person, and has never lied to me. So she really believed what she'd said. In her bedroom, when she'd flashed me her best grin, I discovered what happens after death. You won't make it. There. People don't die, they hide. When I was 10 years old, my brother came home to die on a frigid day in January. Purple lesions ravaged the skin that barely covered his bones. He looked an awful lot like a skeleton, unlike the friendly visitor I had come to know over my short lifetime. My brother Tobias was many years older than me, so I didn't have much of a relationship with him. Still, he made a point to take the train home to New Haven for the holidays, filling our living room with plenty of gifts. One evening, he bought Mom the Fendi baguette she always wanted to show off to her friends at the Junior Women's Club. For my dad's gift, he purchased the George Foreman grill, and all his co-workers at the office buzzed about it. For me, he bought a creepy crawler's oven with liquid and mold containers. The last time he came home, I was excited to show him all the bugs and monsters I made. You better not, my mom said solemnly when I came home from school one day. My arms were filled with the new batch of miniature reptiles and amphibians I had created. They were a big hit at recess, and I knew Tobias would love them. He's super tired, honey. I thought they would cheer Toby up. She shook her head and sobbed, drawing a handkerchief to her face. Honey, we talked about this. Toby is very sick. He won't be able to hear you now. My mom sobbed loudly as my dad slung an arm around her, directing her down the hallway. Devin, your grandparents are in the living room. Why don't you join them? These words caused my mom to weep even louder for some reason as my dad ushered her away. As they reached the living room, I heard the faint words of the live-in hospice nurse that it wouldn't be long now, and something about hearing the death rattle. When the sobs faded and the conversation died down, I turned the knob to his room as quietly as I could. Standing in the doorway, my heart fluttered. My brother not only looked like a skeleton with his frail exterior and dissolving skin, but like one of the gray aliens I made in my creepy crawler's oven a couple of weeks ago. Unlike the alien, however, he had several tubes attached to him that were hooked up to boxy, beeping machines. His body looked so thin that I swear it started to fade into the sheets of his bed. Toby, I said hoarsely. I waited a few minutes before I shouted his name. Toby. Minutes passed before his purple lips quivered and let out an audible groan that dragged on for several seconds. After the groan ended, 6 booming words escaped his lips. Look for me on the walls. A longer groan ensued these words, followed by a long beep from the machine. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as the nurse, my parents, and grandparents rushed into the room. I don't remember much except for shuffling feet, screams, and my father whisking me out of the room and closing the door in my face. The adults were in the room for several minutes before my grandmother finally left with her head cast down. She threw her doughy arms around me and said, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Your brother's gone to heaven with the angels." As the other adults came out of the room, one by one to hug me, apologize, and sob into my small body, I wondered if I should be crying too. I supposed I loved my brother, but I didn't know him well. To me, he was just that friendly visitor who bought me gifts and read me stories. He popped in and out of my life like some magical elf that appeared only for holidays and disappeared like Santa up the chimney or Frosty the Snowman on a sunny day. I put my hands over my eyes and pretended to cry with them. After a while, I asked if it was okay to go up to my room. My parents permitted me. At once, I hurried up the stairs and slammed the door behind me. For hours, I plopped onto my dinosaur bed sheets and stared at the walls. I stared at the walls for so long that I thought my eyes would bleed. The walls of my room were sponge-painted blue, covered in posters of my favorite baseball players and movies. The shapes on my walls were unmoving. As my eyes drew tears and I yawned, I started to drift off to sleep. My room didn't have any windows, so I couldn't tell whether it was nighttime or not. But I suppose night was nearing by the increasing shadows in the room. Something was strange about these shadows, though. They weren't the typical black or gray, but shades of green, I blinked as green circles danced around my walls like a stage spotlight. "Are you awake, Devi boy?" A hollow voice echoed. "It's time to wake up, Devi boy," I said, rubbing my eyes. Who are you? You know who, silly. I don't have much time." I blinked twice and the green circles faded together, all at once. The circles morphed into the shape of a human. The shape looked a little under 6 feet tall, perhaps taller, its figure reaching the brim of the ceiling. Toby, is that you? Who else, Devi boy?" The figure let out a bellowing laugh and stretched atop the ceiling, twisting around the fan in almost a rhythmic pattern. "But I thought you were dead." The figure unleashed another bellowing laugh, this time twisting onto the carpeted floor, its green glow matching the soda I spilled the previous day. "I thought I would die too, Devi boy, but it's the most unusual thing. You don't go to heaven or hell like we learned in church. Don't tell Mom and Dad though, especially not Grandma." "I won't," I said, scratching my head. "But, Toby, if you're not dead, what are you hiding?" The figure's voice changed from a bellowing pitch to a dull whisper. What do you mean?" "You must swear not to tell anyone." "I swear, Toby, I swear." "People don't die," the figure whispered, draining from the carpets, back to a small circle on my wall. "They hide." "From what?" "I don't know yet," the figure said, its voice now trembling. "I just know that we're hiding. We're all hiding." As the figure spoke these words, I saw dozens of green circles bouncing around my walls. They were varying shades of green. Some spoke in whispers like my brother, others spoke in gibberish that sounded like different languages. I shoved my thumbs into my ear canals as the sounds grew louder and more varied. I jammed my eyelids shut as the lights flickered and burned into my retinas. As I screamed, I heard my brother's voice once more. "People don't die, they hide. Devi, they hide, and they must never be found." I screamed so loud that my cat Jasper hollered from the other room. I screamed so loud that my mom, dad, grandparents, and even the live-in nurse hurried upstairs and forced their way into my room. "It's okay, honey," my mom said, pulling me into her bosom. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're all so sad." As the others crowded around me, I continued to scream, though the sounds had disappeared. I still heard my brother's voice loud and clear. "People don't die, they hide." As the days faded into weeks and months, I saw the green circles everywhere, bouncing about the side of buildings, circling the screens of the downtown movie theater, and even on the fence of my backyard. Sometimes, the circles morphed into the shapes of humans. Other times they looked like mere reflections. One time during a sleepover, I swore I even saw the circles morph into the shapes of falling bats on the outsides of my tent. I tried not to scream when I saw them. After a while, I tried not to look. When I didn't look, however, I heard their whispers, which usually amounted to nothing but gibberish. As the months faded into years, I checked myself into therapy. The only chance I had to stop seeing the circles, to stop hearing the awful, muffled voices. As a college student, my campus therapist surmised that the shapes and whispers were my way of coping with loss and grief. He assured me that people truly did die and even took me to the local morgue, which his cousin owned, to show me what a corpse looked like. I admitted that I had never seen my brother's corpse when he died. Seeing the corpses of an old woman and a man as skinny as my brother made me realize how natural death was a part of life. I kept in touch with my therapist after college, and with each passing day, I began to hear the voices even less. For the first time in forever, I could appreciate the sounds of the outdoors that I had taken for granted, even the menial ones like a gust of wind or a child screaming on the playground. For the first time in forever, I could appreciate the laughter of Julia, the girl I took on a first date at the local Starbucks. I loved the sound of her laughter. The sounds of our laughter as we engaged in the silliest conversations. Throughout my life, I heard many wonderful sounds like church bells on my wedding day or the sound of my son Jack crying in my arms. I fell in love with the lights and sounds of my life until the day I started to cough profusely. My wife had taken Jack to daycare as I sat in my home office, typing a draft of my latest article. I felt the urge to cough, a large, bulging urge rising from my chest. As much as I tried to ignore it, I finally unleashed the cough, a cough so powerful that I doubled over onto my desk, spilling blood onto the keyboard. I began to shiver as the blood dripped from my mouth onto the keys and all over the floor. I scrambled to find my cell phone and dial 911 as I continued to convulse blood and cry. After I had emptied all of the contents of blood from my stomach, I collapsed onto the floor with the receiver by my ear. 911, what's your emergency? 911. With what little strength I had left, I pushed my body across the floor to the phone. I threw up a lot of blood. I said weakly, "I'm sorry about that, sir," the dispatcher said. Many moments passed before she spoke again. "Hello? Are you there, sir?" the dispatcher said, her voice suddenly a lot lower and more muffled. "You better start thinking about a good place to hide." As the voice began to cackle, a swarm of green circles danced around my body. I was clinically dead for 10 minutes. I went to heaven, and what I saw there defied every Sunday school parable, every psalm, every sermon about gates of pearl and streets of gold. I woke on my back, spine pressed into a surface that mimicked, grass-pliant yet unyielding, like memory foam carved into blades. Above me stretched a sky that defied language. Clouds hung frozen, their edges unnaturally crisp, as if cut from bleached felt and glued to an abyss. The void behind them was not mere darkness, but erasure, a vacuum that gnawed at the edges of perception, like staring into the static between radio stations. Only the clouds tethered me to reality, their faint bioluminescent glow suggesting some alien photosynthesis, pulsing in slow, rhythmic waves. The field stretched infinitely in all directions, a fractal nightmare of uniformity. Each blade of grass was identical chartreuse at the base, fading to citrine at the tip, precisely 3 millimeters wide. No soil nestled between them. They sprouted from a seamless mat of dull silver, like astroturf woven by machines. When I pressed my palm down, the stems didn't bend. They resisted like plastic bristles, yet emitted a faint organic musk, sweet and cloying. Like rotting lilies, the air hung thick, devoid of humidity or temperature, as though the atmosphere itself had been vacuum-sealed. Time dissolved. Seconds bled into hours. My hand drifted to my chest, no rise, no fall. I clawed at my throat, fingertips sinking into gelatinous flesh that reckoned instantly. Panic flared briefly in my mind, but dissipated just as quickly. My body remained inert, a marionette with severed strings. When I raised my arm, the non-light of this place seeped through my skin, revealing a lattice of veins like cracked porcelain. My flesh was vellum soaked in glycerin. The grass beneath was visible as smudged impressions, a magic eye painting gone wrong. I waved a hand. No shadow followed. No proof I existed at all. A scream tore through my skull, silent and airless, a vacuum-sealed eruption that left no echo in the sterile void. My jaw unhinged grotesquely, tendons straining against their limits. Yet no vibration troubled the stagnant air. Fear metastasized in my gut, a tumor with teeth, but my face stayed slack. A wax museum, replica of terror. Movement flickered at the edge of my dead aquarium vision. 3 figures sat on the grass in the distance, their nudity neither provocative nor obscene, as if gender and modesty had been scrubbed from them entirely. Their skin mirrored mine, semi-opaque with a faint opalescent sheen, like soap bubbles moments before bursting. The oldest, or perhaps merely the most eroded, rose first, his feet levitating a micron above the grass. Each step left no imprint or whisper of friction. He seemed to traverse a hologram rather than solid ground. Up close, his face resembled a Botticelli angel, flawless symmetry marred only by eyes without lids or lashes and lips that moved a half-second out of sync with his words. "Don't worry." The voice emanated from everywhere, the grass beneath me, the air around me, the inside of my molars. It resonated like a bow dragged across cello strings, vibrating deep in my marrow. Everyone feels this way at first. He gestured toward the others. The woman hugged her knees tightly to her chest. Her hair was frozen mid-sway, a cascade of liquid mercury caught in time. The teenage girl plucked at grass blades, with fingers that passed through them like mist. Her face was a mask of automated boredom. Their bodies flickered faintly, as if buffering edges pixelating like corrupted JPEGs. struggling to render fully. "Come," the old man intoned softly but firmly. "Sit with us. We'll answer what we can." Terror should have petrified me, but without cortisol or catecholamines coursing through me here in this place, where biology had no dominion, fear became nothing more than an abstract concept, theoretical and distant. I floated forward instead, legs moving with marionette autonomy, and sank cross-legged beside him. When commanded to do so, the grass beneath us remained preternaturally stiff, jabbing needle-tip precision into my thighs, yet leaving no marks behind. "You must have many questions." His voice rumbled through the ground beneath us, a sub-bass growl that vibrated up through my bones until it reached my teeth. Their eyes pinned me, pupils dilated into black holes surrounded by faintly bioluminescent irises that pulsed faintly like dying embers in milk glass sockets. "Where am I?" My voice startled even me when it emerged, hollowly reverberating oddly as though spoken through an ancient tin can telephone stretched taut between dimensions. "You're an anemone," he replied evenly while his lips stretched into something resembling a smile, but not quite human enough for comfort. It didn't crease his marble-smooth face naturally either way. The name slithered off his tongue like syrup-thick vowels from some archaic dead language, resurrected momentarily just long enough for its meaning alone to haunt its listener afterward indefinitely. I blinked. "So I'm not in heaven, not yet." His gesture swept toward the horizon, where the grass fused seamlessly with the anti-sky. "Anemone is a purgatory of patience, a sieve." The others tilted their heads in unison, their necks creaking faintly like annoyed hinges. "We are the residue, the unworthy sediment, waiting to get into heaven." "Yes." His finger traced the air, painting invisible sigils that dissolved as quickly as they formed. 63 years for me, 58 for her. The woman's nod was robotic, her hair frozen mid-sway like a suspended waterfall. 19 for the child. The girl mimed plucking grass, her fingers phasing through blades as static as plastic ferns. "Time here is not time. Why aren't we in heaven?" He leaned closer, his pupils glowing faintly, twin embers in milk glass eyes. "The soul must molt, shed its husk, regret, greed, the rot of living, until it's weightless, pure." His gaze dropped to my chest. "But yours already burns." He tapped my sternum with a sound like a dull thud, where clay struck by a fist. "Look." I glanced down. A glow pulsed beneath my wax paper skin, not the sickly, guttering flicker of the others, but a relentless white radiance, as if I'd swallowed a neutron star. The old man recoiled slightly, his own chest dimming like a bulb on a dying circuit. "You won't linger here," he whispered, his voice tinged with venomous envy. I squinted eastward, where the void blurred into a silver smudge on the horizon. "How do I leave?" The angel descends for the ready. The others stiffened at his words, their translucent faces contorting, mouths twitching, eyes narrowing as if struck by invisible blows. "You'll see the gate. The rest of us." His voice frayed and unraveled into silence. The girl resumed her pantomime, fingers raking through grass that refused to yield. The woman hugged her knees tightly to her chest, her chin resting on spectral joints. None spoke. None needed to. I followed the old man's gaze eastward again, straining to see what he saw, or perhaps what he only hoped to see. But the void stared back at me with indifference. A shudder passed through the group like an electric current rippling through their forms. The woman's hem sharpened into a whine. The girl's fingers froze mid-pluck. I pressed forward with the question clawing up my throat. "If heaven's real, is hell?" The old man laughed, a dry rasp like beetles scuttling over dead leaves. "Hell is a fairy tale, a scarecrow." He spread his arms wide, encompassing the frozen field around us, the waiting, the nothing. "Souls linger here until the angel comes to get them. I don't think there's a hell, it's only this for us." The others blurred at their edges, their forms pixelating like corrupted film frames struggling to hold shape. The girl hissed softly, her voice frayed and brittle. "He's been here longest. He thinks he knows. He doesn't." The old man ignored her entirely. His gaze latched onto the horizon again, ravenous and unblinking. "You'll learn the truths in heaven," he said softly but firmly. "Ask God about hell, about us, about why your first breath mattered." A pause stretched taut between us before he added, "Then come back and tell us, if you can." Silence smothered the group like an oppressive fog. The woman resumed rocking in place, her hum now tuneless and rhythmic, a sound that gnawed at my nerves without rhythm or melody. Above us, the void deepened further still, the clouds glowing whiter now, or was it my chest light bleeding? Into this fox sky, I opened my mouth. Enough. The old man raised a single finger sharply to silence me before I could speak further. Save your breath, he said flatly but not unkindly. You'll need it. There. Time thickened around us like syrup poured over glass. We sat together in silence and excruciating stillness, akin to holding one's breath indefinitely, as though someone had pressed pause on existence itself. The old man's quartz-like eyes drilled into the eastern void with unwavering focus, while my questions curdled inside me, unspoken yet unbearably heavy, their weight crushing against my ghostly ribs. Then a tremor fissured the air, not a sound, but a frequency, a subsonic drone that vibrated the marrow of my translucent bones. The grass remained petrified, unyielding, but we shuddered, our forms rippling like oil on water. Above the eastern horizon, the void tore open with a soundless scream, its edges bleeding molten gold. From the rift poured light so pure it seared my ghostly eyes, etching after images of prismatic static onto my vision. And then the thing emerged. It unfolded like an ancient star exhaling its first breath, a colossal orb armored in segmented plates of bone, white and gilt, each joint humming with celestial harmonics that resonated in my chest like the tolling of cathedral bells. Wings wider than cityscapes arched from its flanks, but these were no feathered limbs. They writhed with thousands of eyes, human pupils dilated in terror, goat-slitted irises glowing sulfur yellow, compound insect lenses fracturing light into rainbows. Each eye blinked in discordant rhythm, their depths swirling with dying galaxies, newborn nebulae, and the cold fire of quasars being born. The group jerked upright as one, their limbs snapping taut as if yanked by invisible strings. The old man wheeled toward me, his lips contorting soundlessly, his face a mask of raw hunger and venom. The angel's wings beat once, a thunderclap that compressed the air into a diamond-hard wall. But not a single blade of grass quivered beneath us. It hovered there, suspended in its incomprehensible majesty, every eye swiveling to pin me in a kaleidoscope of gazes. The voice impaled my skull. Do not be afraid. It was not sound but sensation, the taste of copper and burnt honey on my tongue, the smell of glaciers calving into Arctic seas, the pressure of a supernova's shockwave flattening my form into nothingness. My knees buckled under its weight, yet my terror dissolved into a narcotic haze thick as opium smoke, coating my mind in velvet. Oblivion. Come to me. I moved without volition, a marionette tugged skyward by invisible strings. The angel's carapace peeled open with mechanical precision, its segmented plates retracting like the petals of some obscene metal flower. Within lay a core of liquid light that churned and writhed like molten plasma. It cascaded over me in a torrent, dissolving my translucent flesh in layers, first skin cold and sharp, like alcohol evaporating, then muscle a sigh of release, then bone the snap of a shackle breaking. I should have screamed, but instead, I unraveled. You will do perfectly. The light was neither warm nor cold, it was revelation. It flayed me to my essence, stripping away doubt, memory, fear, everything, until only a single radiant thread remained, pure and untainted by thought or form. My disintegration was not agony but surrender, the relief of a marathoner collapsing at the finish line, lungs heaving, soul singing. I ascended. The eyes on the wings tracked my rise with unblinking precision, galaxies spinning in their depths like cosmic clocks, ticking down to some unknowable end. Below me, the figures dwindled. The old man's mouth twisted into a silent curse. The girl's half-raised hand trembled as though fighting an invisible leash that bound her to this place. Then the rift sealed itself with a wet, organic snick, and anemone winked out of existence. The light swelled, a supernova in reverse, its brilliance contracting inward, until it dimmed to a dying ember. Darkness. Not the hungry void I had seen before, but something softer, of velvety oblivion, dense with possibility. Somewhere in its depths, a faint hum resonated, the echo of a heartbeat, or perhaps the birth cry of a star. Consciousness seeped back like ink spreading through oil. I blinked, and the sterile void of anemone had been replaced by a gilded nightmare. The field around me teemed with grass that moved, blades rippling in a breeze that carried no scent. No warmth. Beyond stretched a city that defied physics. Spires of molten gold twisted into fractal patterns. Bridges of translucent crystal arcing between towers like frozen lightning. The structures pulsed faintly, as though breathing, their surfaces crawling with hieroglyphs that squirmed when stared at directly. Far beyond it all loomed a throne the size of a mountain range, its edges blurred by distance and the sheer impossibility of its scale. Upon it sat a figure of pure radiance, its form shifting between humanoid and geometric abstraction, a head like a dying star swiveling slowly to survey its domain. The light from it pressed against my vision, not blinding, but oppressive, like standing too close to an open furnace. I spun, searching for the old man, the girl, but I was alone. Until I wasn't. They appeared without sound, two men carved from wax by a deranged sculptor. The taller one's hair gleamed like polished brass, his companion's was obsidian black. Their features were mirror symmetrical to the millimeter, too perfect to be human. No pores marred their alabaster skin. Their eyelids didn't flutter when they blinked. They moved in staggered unison, the shorter one always half a step behind. Their robes shimmered with false humility, threads of light weaving through linen that hissed faintly, like radio static caught between stations. The shorter one tilted his head, eyes swallowing the light, pupils flat and depthless as event horizons. When he smiled, his teeth were slightly too large, slightly too sharp, slightly too white. "Hello, James," the taller one's voice was, a wind chime made of bone. "Welcome to Heaven's workshop." He spread his arms wide, sleeves billowing to reveal wrists jointed like doll limbs. "Ask your questions. We do love fresh perspectives." "What's going on?" my voice echoed oddly in the space around us, as if the air itself resisted sound. The shorter one buzzed, a locust's rattle trapped in a human throat. "Tell me, James." He tapped my chest with his fingertip, freezing cold against my translucent flesh. "Does it itch?" The light inside, like a trapped moth battering your ribs. I staggered back instinctively. "What is it? Why does it feel alive?" "Because it hungers." The taller one began circling me like a predator stalking prey. "Most souls are clotted with prayer, diluted by millennia of groveling to imaginary gods. But you," his breath smelled of burnt wiring and ozone. "You starved yours, let it grow feral, untamed, a perfect battery." "Battery for what?" My voice cracked under the weight of his words. The shorter one giggled, a sound like breaking glass underfoot. "The gears of paradise, James. The engines that spin the stars." He gestured toward the distant throne with mock reverence. "Even he needs fuel, especially now with so few pure souls left to burn." But I didn't believe. "Why me?" My words tumbled out in desperation. "Belief is a contaminant." The taller one's smile stretched unnaturally wide, lips splitting at the corners without bleeding. "You're a virgin wellspring. No saints, no sins, no tainted dogma, just raw, screaming potential." I backed away further this time, my heels sinking into grass that gripped like tar. "You can't just take it, can't we?" The taller one purred as if savoring my resistance. "But we're so generous, we'll even trade a gift for a gift." His pupils dilated until they swallowed his irises whole. "What does your mortal heart crave?" "James, wealth, power, wings to flutter about like some songbird." The question curdled in the air between us. "Do I have a choice?" My voice was barely above a whisper now. The shorter one leaned in close enough for me to feel his breath, a dry rasp against my skin. "Choice is a fairy tale," he hissed through, teeth too sharp for his mouth. His tongue flickered, briefly forked and serpentine before retreating behind his grin. "But we'll pretend you do. Play along, it's more fun." My mind scrabbled for leverage as panic clawed at me from within. The throne's light pulsed in my peripheral vision, a migraine wrapped in majesty. And I blurted out the first thing I could think of. I wanted to fly, to be an angel. They froze. Then the shorter one howled, laughter shredding through the air in dissonant harmonics that made my ears ache. "Fly. You think feathers and harps, oh, James." He clutched his sides as if he might split open from amusement. His ribs creaked audibly under the strain. "You'll fly all right, straight into the furnace." The taller one raised a hand sharply, silencing him with an almost imperceptible gesture. His expression softened into something resembling pity or perhaps mockery disguised as mercy. If flight is your desire. His fingers snapped once. The air tore open. A portal bloomed before us, a gyre of cobalt and magnesium white light, whose edges gnawed at reality itself like acid eating through fabric. The shorter one seized my arm with talons disguised as fingers. His grip burned cold against my spectral flesh. "Come, fledgling," he hissed gleefully. "Let's clip your wings." I resisted instinctively, but the light inside my chest betrayed me. It tugged toward them, as if magnetized by their presence, or their willpower alone. My body lurched forward without consent. They stepped through first, their forms unraveling into shadow puppet silhouettes. As they disappeared into the portal's swirling depths, it hummed ominously, a dentist's drill amplified through infinite black holes. And then it was my turn. I followed. The air turned gelid, thick with the sterile stench of formaldehyde and ozone. The room's whiteness wasn't just light, it was absence, leaching color from my vision until the world blurred into a nauseating void. Then I saw them, 1,000 eyes, bulging from every surface like tumors, their lids peeled back wetly, irises kaleidoscoping between reptilian slits and human pupils, each gaze drilling into me with predatory focus. The floor undulated faintly, a living carpet of eyeballs rolling beneath my feet, their viscous tears pooling around my ankles. The golden slab dominated the room, sculpted into a gargantuan hand frozen mid-reach, fingers curled into talons, its surface rift with glyphs that squirmed like tapeworms, their edges glowing faintly bioluminescent, as if fed by rot. The air around it warped, humming with a subsonic frequency that vibrated my teeth. "Lie down." The shorter one's voice wasn't a sound, it was a command etched directly into my skull. I stumbled backward, but the eyes on the floor shifted, their collective gaze herding me toward the slab. My chest light flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that slithered up the walls like sentient stains. "Lie down." His words splintered into echoes, each syllable sharper than the last. Lytropes lashed out serpentine tendrils of liquid nitrogen, hissing and steaming as they coiled around my limbs. Their touch burned with a cold so absolute. It felt like fire, searing through my spectral flesh into the core of whatever passed for my soul. I screamed, but the sound fractured into static, swallowed by the room's insatiable whiteness. The slab throbbed beneath me, its vibrations sensing with my unraveling pulse. The glyphs squirmed faster now, forming patterns that made my mind recoil, a language of tumors, of broken bones, of starved things chewing through the walls of reality. The taller one raised a prismatic shard, its edges fracturing light into colors that hurt: ultraviolet, infrared, hues no human I should perceive, painless. He lied as he drove the shard into my shoulder blade. My memories hemorrhaged. First to go, my mother's voice singing lullabies, dissolving into radio static. Then my first kiss, lips turning to ash, the taste of strawberry gum replaced by bile, the sting of a skinned knee, the thrill of a childhood bicycle ride, the warmth of a dog's fur, all siphoned into the slab's ravenous glow. Voices mine, theirs, others, gibbered in a guttural tongue, Asclepius for Aphanizestai. The wing was a living blasphemy. Feathers of rusted iron, membranes veined with pulsating maggots, talons dripping viscous black fluid. The taller one rammed it into my shoulder blade. It ripped, burrowing into me with a sound like teeth grinding on bone. My back arched as the wing fused to my spine, tendrils of rot spreading through my veins like ink and water. A flicker beyond the void. Beep, beep, beep. A hospital ceiling. A defibrillator's crack. Clear. My corpse jolted on the gurney. A nurse's glove gripped my face. "James, stay with me." Back in the white hell. The shorter one sawed into my other shoulder blade, his serrated blade screeching against spectral bone. "Hurry," he spat as the taller one slammed the second wing into me, this one chitinous and iridescent, its edges sharp enough to split atoms. My chest light dimmed further now, its radiance siphoned into the slab like blood draining from an open wound. Another flicker: beep dash beep dash beep dash beep. A needle's bite. Cold fluid flooding my veins. VFib converting. Don't stop compressions. The shorter one flipped me onto my stomach pinning me as the wings twitched to life, their grotesque sinews knotting themselves into muscle and bone. He plunged a scalpel deep into my sternum. My light gushed out in torrents, pooling on the slab before evaporating into hungry glyphs. "Take it," he howled, claws raking at my chest.